Good evening. If you haven't been here, and I saw many hands raised for your first night here, we've been taking just a few minutes as we're talking about expanding God's kingdom and looking back and reminding ourselves how God has expanded his kingdom in this territory before. A foundational quote is, "We have nothing to fear for the future except as we forget the way the Lord has led us in his teaching in our past history." And so we've looked at how the First Adventist Church was formed in East Tennessee. The First Adventist Church was formed in Georgia. And a couple people asked some questions. So just real quick, the Georgia Conference was organized in 1901. The Cumberland Conference was formed also in 1901. And then in 1932, during the Depression, those two conferences were combined into the conference that we know today, Georgia-Cumberland, East Tennessee, all of Georgia, and one beautiful county in North Carolina. But tonight, we're going to fast forward a little bit to the 1950s, and we're going to talk about the tale of two cities. You could say it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We're going to go to 1955 to maybe mid-Georgia, not quite South Georgia, but if you were to go southwest out of Atlanta, you would eventually come to the town, the city of LaGrange. And a little bit further south than that, you would find the town of Pine Mountain Valley. That's over by Callaway Gardens. Perhaps you've been there. Well, in 1955, the LaGrange area had no Adventist church. There was no Adventist church in LaGrange. But Pine Mountain Valley, although it was the smaller town, it had an Adventist church with over 100 members. And those 100 members, as we've heard stories here tonight, were deeply engaged in wanting to reach their neighbors. And those 100 members looked at LaGrange, and over the course of a bit of time, they signed up over 1,000 families for the Southern Union Bible Correspondence School. And those 100 members gave hundreds of Bible studies, not in their town, but in the town of LaGrange. And then as the course went on, something similar to what we're talking about in Chattanooga, an evangelist came to town. Fortis Dedamore, one of the premier evangelists in Adventist history. He was at that time working for the Texas Conference, but often went to other places. And he came and did a 3-week series. That was his signature style, a 3-week series in LaGrange. And the reports say that the first couple nights, there was over 500 people in attendance. The conference had to bring chairs in from other places because there wasn't enough room for everyone to sit. And at the end of 3 weeks, they had a baptism. And there were 9 people baptized. And you might say, oh, that doesn't sound like a lot. But there were also over 40 people who were continuing to study. And over the next few weeks, some evangelists from the conference and the conference office continued to work with them. And 3 months later, praise the Lord, the LaGrange Church was organized in the fall of 1955. That's a pretty incredible story that the evangelist came to town, and 3 months later, a church was organized. But I want you to not miss something, what I think is even the more incredible part of the story. Because yes, it's amazing that after this evangelistic meeting, there was a new church. But did you hear what I said happened before? When those church members were signing people up to do Bible studies, so that when the evangelist came to town, there were people that were ready to hear the 3 angels' message. Let me tell you just one story, one example. There was a brother and sister Turner who lived in Pine Mountain Valley. One day they were driving about 25 miles towards LaGrange, not for leisure, but they were going on a business trip. They were going to sell some cattle. And as they were driving, Mrs. Turner said to her husband, "I'm going to try to sign this family up for the Bible school." And so when they arrived to the town, or to the city, to Mr. and Mrs. Hanks, they came into the home, and the first thing they noticed on the kitchen table was an open Bible. And as they continued to talk before they left, not only had they signed them up for the Bible school, they had also sold some of their cattle. So that was an exciting day for them. But about 3 weeks later, the phone rang, and Mr. Hanks was calling Mr. Turner. And Mr. Hanks said, I just want to let you know, I'm not trying to get anything, but one of the cows died. It's been long enough. You're not to blame. I just wanted to let you know one of the cows died. And Mr. Turner said, you know what? Why don't you come to our house, look at our cows, and pick the one that you want. Replace that one that passed away. The Hanks family was so impressed by this kind of business dealing that they said, these people must be deep Christians. We want to study those Bible lessons that they signed us up for. And so they dug in even deeper to that Bible correspondence school, and before long they had completed the entire set. They wrote the correspondence school and said, we're done. We believe all these things, but there's no Sabbath-keeping church in LaGrange. And wouldn't you know it, just about that time is when Fortis Dedamore came to town. And when the time came for the baptisms, sure enough, the very first people to be baptized were Mr. Hanks, Mrs. Hanks, and their 2 sons. All because one family was willing to go out of their comfort zone to ask someone if they wanted to study the Bible. And not only that, but they lived such a life that they exhibited the grace of God, the love of Jesus shining through their life. We can fast forward to today. You can go to Pine Mountain Valley. There's still a church. According to the record, there's only about 25 faithful members that are in the Pine Mountain Valley Church. But in LaGrange, there's currently 3 churches across 2 conferences with over 250 members in LaGrange. And the fact is, we know that there's cycles in towns and churches. There's growth cycles and there's decline cycles. But it doesn't matter what size your church is. It doesn't matter what size your town is. There's somebody around you that you can share Jesus with. There's somebody around you that you can exhibit the love of Jesus for. A few nights ago, I asked you, do you know the history of your church? Tonight, I want to ask you, do you know the spiritual history of your family? Because the fact of the matter is that no matter if you're the first Seventh-day Adventist or you're a 5th-generation Seventh-day Adventist, at some point in your family tree, someone stepped out of their comfort zone to knock on your grandparents' door, to invite them to an evangelistic meeting. Somehow, someone in your family learned about the 3 angels' message. Is there someone that you need to call tonight? Because if you don't know that story, you need to find out. You need to call Grandma and say, hey, how did we become Seventh-day Adventists? Maybe you do know that story. Well, then you need to call your child or your grandchild and make sure they have heard the story of your spiritual life. So is there someone that you can share Jesus with? Is there someone that you can show Jesus to? Thank you.